about future classes and field days. The next thing we have coming up is Saturday, June 29th, from 10 a.m. to noon. One of the farmers here in our program is going to teach how to grow oyster mushrooms. So anyone's welcome to come and attend that if you're interested. It should be a fun field day. He learned how when he was living in Mexico, and he's bringing it back to share with other farmers. So that's again Saturday, June 29th from 10 to noon. So hopefully you can come to that too. And I think that's all for announcements. For Big River Farms growers, I wanted to let you know we're having our organic inspection in 2 weeks on June 26th. It's a Wednesday, so I'll be emailing you details about that, but we'll have to schedule record check-ins. And that's it. That's the big one. So without further ado, we have a couple of guests here. So first I'm going to introduce Stephanie from Moses.
Hi everyone.
So Moses helped us advertise our field day, so we have some new faces here, potentially from Moses. And I thought I would just let you, Stephanie, talk a little bit about what Moses does and what resources you have with you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Correct. Moses stands for Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Service, and
Tonight we're going to talk about organic weed control, and we have two presenters. I'll introduce Molly first. She'll be speaking second. Molly is the farm director here at Big River Farms, and I'll let you talk a little bit more about your experience, I guess, when we start your part of the presentation. And we also have Annie Claude here from University of Minnesota Extension, and maybe you can tell a little bit about what Extension does too in your role and your experience, and then I'll let you take it away.
Okay,
Cool.
sounds good.
Thanks.
Hi, so my name's Annie Claude. I'm the statewide extension educator for fruits and vegetables at University of Minnesota. Just started a year ago. The other statewide fruit and vegetable extension educator is actually behind us. That's Natalie back in that field. She's setting up an experiment on flea beetle management. So I'm assuming she'll come join us in a bit. But I started about a year and a half ago, and what I do is basically I assist farmers with issues that they have with growing fruits and vegetables. And about 75% of the farmers we work with are organic, so a lot of the recommendations that I give are obviously organic recommendations. Let's see, I work with all different kinds of crops. Sometimes I do field days like this. Sometimes farmers call me up and say, hey, I have a question, can you come visit my farm? Or we talk over the phone, so sometimes I help individually like that. We have a newsletter where we put out newsletter articles about timely issues that are going on and how to address those. And we also have a podcast about fruit and vegetable issues and how to treat them. So those are just some of the things that Natalie and I do. I got my master's in horticulture at Penn State, and then my husband was still finishing up his PhD there, and so I worked for the weed management group at Penn State for a long time and learned a lot of things about managing weeds organically. Not only how hard it is, but some tricks to help make it a little easier too. And a lot of what I did was research cover crop solutions for managing weeds in both tilled systems and non-tilled systems. So quite a different array of things, but I know that one of the major issues that people are having in Minnesota right now is thistles and also quackgrass. Gave a presentation at the Minnesota Organic Conference, if anybody was at that, about different ways to manage thistles. So I'll start with thistles, and I'll talk about quackgrass too, but a lot of the kind of principles for these two weeds, even though they are very different, a lot of the ways that we think about managing them are similar, because both of these weeds are perennials and they're spreading perennials, which means that they have rhizomes or roots that spread throughout the soil, and they actually reproduce that way. And so, and can you guys hear me in the back? Okay, awesome. I can't tell with the wind. So I potted up a couple of plants here so you guys can see these. Thistles are, obviously I don't have gloves, so I'm going to show you what rhizomes look like via quackgrass, and I'm sure anybody who's out there weeding in the field has seen these, but let's just talk about them. So this is a spreading perennial grass, and these rhizomes are these fibrous roots that are coming out the sides. As you can see, they're spreading horizontally through the soil instead of spreading vertically downward, and that's what helps these plants to actually reproduce very quickly. So if I kind of get some of the soil out of here, and I'm gonna pass these around a little bit, you can see off of these rhizomes, they're sending out other little roots, and those roots are what become the new plants. And so that's how they spread, and that's why they're so hard to manage, because they're spreading underneath the ground. So this goes for both quackgrass and thistles. They're pretty similar in this respect. I'm just not gonna pick up the thistle right now because that would hurt. So yeah, it allows them to move very quickly through the soil, but the other thing that it means is that if we use tillage as a way to manage these weeds, the tillage equipment can actually latch on to these rhizomes because they're so flexible, and it can carry these rhizomes to a different part of the field, and they can actually reroot there. So if you just till your field once or twice during the season, that ends up spreading them more than it ends up controlling them. So we can use tillage to manage thistles and quackgrass, but it has to be tillage that's done like every 2 weeks throughout the whole season. So this becomes something that is not necessarily practical in a lot of cases when you want to have a crop in your field, because how are you going to be tilling that every couple weeks? So that's why these weeds are particularly difficult. So I've listed up here, well, the other thing I guess I want to say about spreading perennials, rhizomes, I covered what those are, but the rhizomes not only help them spread through the soil and reproduce, they also store all the energy of the plant during the winter, since these are perennials. And so what happens is during the winter and the early spring, all of the energy and the sugars in the plant are being stored underground. And then during the season, like in the spring, the plant starts putting some of that energy into growing the leaves and the stems of the plant. And so it's moving that energy from the soil into the top part of the plant throughout the summer, up until about September. And that's when those plants start putting that energy back into the soil. This is a really important thing to think about, even though it might not seem so, because it has management implications for us. It means that if we can target and control thistles when a lot of that energy is in the above ground part of the plant, we're going to have a much bigger impact on thistles than we are if we're, say, mowing them down or tilling them when they're really small. So this is about a foot tall thistle that I dug up over there just a few minutes ago. It's starting to form a flower head on it. So flowers are something that form on thistles about, mid-June typically. Of course, they're coming up all through the season as well. And in this pot, if I can do this without touching it, this is a small thistle about 3 inches tall that I just dug up as well. So if you go through and mow these thistles when they're just 3 or 4 inches tall, you're getting rid of a little bit of energy of that plant, maybe 5%, but it's very quickly going to come back up again because so much of its energy is down below the soil. And it's like, oh, you cut something off, no problem, I'm just gonna regrow. But if you attack the thistle when it's this big, you're cutting off like 80% of the energy in that plant. And so you're hurting it a lot more. So it may seem counterintuitive, but if you have thistles in your field and you can stand to wait to control them until they're larger, you're gonna have to go through your field fewer times to control those. Small, you're gonna have to mow maybe once a week. Big, mow them maybe 3 or 4 times a year in order to reduce those populations for next year. So the other thing to think about when we're talking about this is the more thistles grow, like let's picture a patch of thistles, the more they grow one season, the better they're gonna grow the next season. Because as they're growing, at the end of the season, they put all that energy back in the roots. So if you can weaken them a lot one season, you're gonna have some come up the next year, but there are gonna be a lot fewer. So just some of the principles behind that. So there are about 8 what I call tactics in the toolbox of managing thistles. Because when we talk about integrated weed management or organic weed management, we're talking about using mechanical methods like mowing and tilling. And then we've got our cultural methods like planting cover crops, using solarization, using black plastic in the rows, things like that. And then vinegar is what we would call a chemical control because it's something that you're spraying onto the plant that reacts with the plant and kills it that way. So I want to talk about mowing first, and then I'm going to go through all of these tactics and think about not just thistles for these, but quackgrass too, because a lot of the same principles here do apply to quackgrass. So I'm going to go through these and then maybe talk about some of the ideas that you guys have tried for managing thistles, and I'll suggest a few different plans or examples of things you can do during the season to actually use these tactics in your field. So with mowing thistles, this is something during the growing season. Of course, it's more relevant between the rows than it is actually in your rows. This might be something that you can do at the beginning of the season before you plant if you're in a no-till system, but I know in a lot of these fields we are tilling quite a bit. So if you're somebody who has a cover crop planted in between your rows, going in and mowing that regularly every few weeks will help quite a bit. Let's say you have asparagus planted, which more and more farmers in Minnesota are planting asparagus. That's a perennial system. And so a lot of farmers will just mow in between the asparagus rows in order to manage thistles. Again, if you can wait until the thistles are larger, you're going to have to mow fewer times in order to cut those populations back and control them. So flaming is the next one, using a propane weeder or a flame weeder. With this one, I have a question mark next to it because it may or may not really be effective for thistles. I have read studies where they used a flame weeder on parts of their field in order to try to control them. How a flame weeder acts is you're not actually trying to burn the plants, you're just trying to create a lot of heat on the plants, and so it dries out the leaves and kills them. This is going to have about the same effect as mowing would, because you're not actually able to kill the whole plant. When you use a flame weeder on a thistle, that plant is too big. Basically, you would just be drying out parts of the leaves. So it's kind of like mowing thermally. Tilling. So this is one where, has anybody ever tried to till up thistles? And what was your experience when you did that?
I had to go deep, but they still come back up.
Yeah.
Come back up, so it was like pain in the ass.
Yeah. Did you do it more than one time a season?
Yeah.
Okay. How often did you do it?
Probably like twice or three times.
Twice or three times? Okay. Yep. Do you feel like they kept coming up at the same amount, or did more come up, or did less come up?
They came up at the same amount.
Okay.
We know that this one had that one, it's like what it has there, where it has
Yeah, those
the
rhizomes.
rhizomes. So we know that we had to go deep on it. We couldn't just just till the top and then go back.
Yep. Yep, so it was about the same when you tilled. You raised your hand too.
Yeah, I had basically the same experience.
Yep.
The only time I tilled thistle was in the woods for deer plot.
Yeah.
And it was before planting, but I was growing for deer. And same thing, they came back up bucks.
Okay.
And I actually tilled it when it was fairly tall.
Pretty
before
big too.
flowering.
Yeah. Yeah, so tilling
I wanted
is...
to plant later in the, the first week of July, so it was already along with wet grass and
Right.
everything else that was in there.
Yep. So some of that could be the rhizomes were just going back in the soil and regrowing from where they already were. And some of it maybe there was just so much energy in the ground that it might have needed to take more than one tillage pass in order to really kick those populations back.
Yeah, I took fairly deep too. I think
Yeah.
6 inches.
Yeah.
Mine is thistle. I do wait until they tall, and I just dig a little bit more and then hold
Mhm.
until they come out really long.
Yeah.
Some. So I got the population is kind of reduced a little bit, but on the other side, and should we just wait until they almost flower and we cut it, and so that way it can help or not?
Okay.
I mean, it's on the wood, like around the field.
Mhm.
I feel like on the field, on the edge of the field, if you not cut it, and when they flower and the flower is flying up and landing into the land.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I wouldn't wait to cut them till, like what you're saying, I would not wait to cut them till the flowers have formed. I would definitely want to cut them or mow them before those flowers have formed. Like right here, you can see the flowers starting to form, but it's not quite there yet. It's just the buds. So I think that's a perfect time. But whether you're tilling it or cutting it, it's necessary to do that multiple times rather than just once, really, to get that population under control. So I'm not sure, were you doing it multiple times or just the once?
Yeah.
Okay.
Before planting or planting.
Okay. Yeah, and was it your first year? Like, were you tilling up new ground?
Yes, and I did it 2 years in a row.
Okay.
And basically the same results. It was just kind of came back the same, maybe
Yeah.
a little bit more.
Okay. Yep.
Definitely not a noticed reduction.
Sure. Yeah, so it is a tactic if you're going to use tillage to control it. If you have a really severe tillage population or thistle population or quackgrass and you really want to use tillage as your control mechanism, it might take a whole season in order to do that, which is why that's not a great answer, but it really does take multiple tillage applications for it to have an effect. So what else can we do? Solarization. I forgot my solarization plastic, but we'll see a lot of plastic out in the field anyway. So solarization plastic is a clear, thick plastic. This is most relevant if you have a patch of thistles that's maybe 30 feet by 30 feet, but no larger than that. Let's say it's a really thick thistle patch. You don't want to go through and hand weed all of that. Solarization plastic works by you spread it out on the field after you've mowed all of your weeds down, and then you'll secure it to the ground using soil or using logs, bricks, something to keep it down. And it works by creating a lot of heat underneath that plastic and kills thistles that way. If anybody knows Courtney Cheetah at the Student Organic Farm, she tried a few different tactics last year. We just created a podcast episode where we interviewed her on this, so she could tell you what she did. But she used clear plastic for solarization, and then she used a black billboard plastic. And she found that for thistles, both the clear and the black plastic worked really well. But for quackgrass, the black plastic worked a lot better than the clear plastic at controlling them. So what she did was she put them on for 4 to 6 weeks. I think it was 4 weeks. Towards the beginning of the season when those when those weeds were just starting to form, and it created a lot of heat under there. It didn't allow those weeds to grow, so it interrupted their life cycle. And then she took that off at the beginning of July, and she planted a late crop in there. I think she did lettuce on that field. She did broccoli as well in another plot, but putting that solarization plastic down really kicked back the thistles, and she said that the rest of the season her thistle populations were way down because she was able to force them to not reproduce at all for half the season. So that worked out really well for her. I know other farmers who haven't had quite those drastic experiences that she had, but it's definitely something worth trying. If you already have black plastic down on your rows, that itself can serve as a form of solarization because you're creating a really hot environment underneath that plastic. So if you're already doing that, that's great. Cover crops. This is also something that Courtney tried, and a lot of people have tried for thistles. Yeah.
Can I ask a question about the solarization?
Yeah.
And the plastic?
Yeah.
Sometimes they have like some plastic that's white on one side and black on the other.
Oh, sure.
Do you put the black side up?
So for regular production purposes, you would put the white side up
Okay.
because that's reflecting light. But for these purposes, I would put the black side up because that's going to create a hotter environment underneath.
Okay.
I'm afraid if you put the white side up, it wouldn't be as hot under there.
Okay.
Yep. So cover crops. This is a topic I like a lot. When we're talking about cover crops for weed control, we call them smother crops because the point of the cover crop then is to smother out and outcompete weeds. And so I'm just going to use Courtney as an example again at the student farm. Last year, she tried sorghum Sudan grass in one part of a field, and right next to that, she tried buckwheat. And what she did was she planted those on the same date. It was right at the beginning of June. And buckwheat has a short life cycle, so she grew that for 5 weeks before she terminated it. And with the sorghum Sudan grass, it grows so quickly and so tall. It can grow to about 6 feet tall. And so she terminated that in, I think it was the end of July, and then she just did a real late planting after that. So with the buckwheat, she really liked that one because buckwheat grows so quickly and so densely that it was difficult for her to find any thistles in that buckwheat. I should say that the field where she was trying this had gigantic populations of thistles the year before. I was supposed to do a research trial on that field, but the thistles were so thick that we couldn't plant anything at all, which is what motivated her to do that cover crop study. And so it went from just 100% thistles to maybe a thistle every few feet with that buckwheat cover crop. And then after that cover crop was done, she did broccoli following that. And so she was still able to get a crop that year, even though she wasn't able to get a crop in that space during the beginning of the year. And then with the sorghum Sudan grass, it was planted right next to it. Just a huge, thick, tall canopy. It's very, very difficult for thistles to grow through that. So this is something where you could either plant a sorghum Sudan grass cover crop for the first part of the season for a few weeks and then terminate it. Or if you weren't set on getting a crop into that area that year, let's say it's just a small area of your field that you're trying to control thistles on, you could grow it until it's tall, mow it again, and let it grow back again, because sorghum Sudan grass is one of those that we can mow once during the season and have it come back. So those are just a couple cover crop ideas. Yeah.
Do you know the seeding rates that she used on this?
Ooh, I don't. Great question. If you listen to the podcast, I'm pretty sure she says it in there. So I can get you that info. Yep. If you're using cover crops for the purposes of weed control, it's always a good idea to bump that seeding rate up from what they say in the recommendations on the package, because those recommendations are just for organic matter addition, nitrogen addition. But if you're really going to try to use them for weed control, they need much denser plantings for that. Clover, unfortunately, does not make a very good smother crop for thistles or quackgrass, because those plants are not as dense, they don't grow as quickly. Winter rye is one where you can plant it during the fall, and then you would let it grow through the spring and then terminate it in the late spring before you plant. This one can be good for quackgrass, but it's not as relevant for thistles. Quackgrass is something that comes up in the spring, and so if you have rye planted in there, it is going to compete with quackgrass in the spring. But thistles, we're really worried about thistles in the summer, and so if you're planting a cover crop in the fall, terminating in the spring, it's not really going to impact it that much. But with a cereal rye, I would put on a pretty high rate of that too.
That I have actually seen work very well. As a matter of fact, the farmer that came and was going to seed our hay did rye in the fall, not as a nurse crop, just as a crop, a relatively dense crop. And I even questioned him. I said, "You're sure you didn't put any herbicide on this?" And he laughed, and it was clean. And I'm mostly interested in quackgrass and reed canary grass.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I repeat what you said, because I'm not sure everybody could hear?
Yeah, go ahead.
And if I butcher it, just tell me.
No, that's
so it was your neighbor?
Right.
Her neighbor planted cereal rye in the fall and let it grow into the spring, and he had really, really good weed control. No herbicides used or anything.
For quackgrass.
And it was mainly for quackgrass, right? Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So that's reassuring, because quackgrass is coming up pretty early in the season. So if you have rye that's 1.5 feet tall, yeah, that's going to be competing with that pretty well. Do you know, did he use a broadcast, or did he plant it in rows?
He drilled it.
He drilled it? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Because sometimes I wonder if we seed it broadcast, is it going to have better control over weeds than if we do it in rows? And I've seen it both ways, and I haven't seen the data on that, but I kind of think if we don't have those row spaces in between, that it might have better control, but I'm not sure.
Oh, I know I struggle with quackgrass in the garden, so I thought he would be struggling with it out there.
Yeah.
It was a pretty good solution.
Yeah. That's awesome. So the next one is vinegar. I want to talk about vinegar as an herbicide. So this is something where it's a contact herbicide, and it is technically an herbicide. It's organic, but if you're using something that you spray on to kill weeds, that's just what I mean by herbicide. So if you use vinegar, it just affects the parts of the plant that it contacts. as opposed to something that you spray that would be systemic and kill the whole plant and the roots. So if you spray vinegar on thistles, it's kind of going to have the same sort of effect as if you use a flamer or if you mow, because it's just going to affect the leaves that it actually touches, and new leaves are going to come up from the bottoms of those plants. So it can help a little bit, but I really wouldn't try to rely on that as a control mechanism. I also kind of wonder about, if you're going to go through your field and spray a bunch of vinegar, would it not be faster and have the same effectiveness to just go through it with a mower or with a weed whacker or something like that? So I'm not saying don't use it, but I wouldn't rely on it. And then, of course, resulting to hand pulling. You were saying that you use a small shovel and then you're able to pull up a really tall taproot. And I agree with that. And to be honest, if I have just small patches of thistles and I'm willing to spend a couple hours out there getting every one, that's where I've had the best long-term effectiveness with it. Just because that taproot is, maybe 8 inches long. If you can get out 5 to 8 inches of that taproot, it's going to take at least a month for thistles to come back in that spot. So if you can do that on the whole patch, to me, even though it's super time consuming, you're still going to have the best, fastest control with that. Yeah.
I saw something online a couple months ago about electrocuting them.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know anything
Right.
on that?
I did read a study on that, and I talked to a couple farmers at the Minnesota Organic Conference. One farmer said that it didn't really have an effect. The other one said that it had a pretty good effect for him. But I think it's so new that there just isn't a lot of research on it yet. So I can't really speak to that. I can just say what I've heard from other farmers. So I think it's experimental, and if you want to give it a try, I'd love to hear how it goes.
They were using it on a large-scale organic wheat.
Yeah.
It looked pretty cool. It was just zapping those weeds like no one's business.
Yep, exactly. So this is something, it goes behind a tractor, and they usually do it at night, and it just zaps the weeds. That farmer who I talked to at the conference, I need to get in touch with him, because if he uses it again this summer, I really want to see how it goes. It'd be cool to get a video of. So before we go on to the next activity, I wanted to suggest a few example plans that you could do, because we're talking about tactics here, but the next step is to think about your own farm and how you might use these tactics together to really control thistle, because obviously, and quackgrass, because this is something where there's no silver bullet, there's no one solution, so we do have to think about how they work in our systems. I was going to write these on the board, but I didn't do that fast enough. So one example plan and this is based on kind of what Courtney did, you could try planting buckwheat in May, and of course that does mean that you're losing the beginning part of the season, so that would be the disadvantage of that. And then terminate the buckwheat in late June, and then you have the rest of the season for crop, so you could plant a late broccoli, lettuce, carrots, something else like that you could just do in half a season. Not a perfect system, obviously, but that's one idea. So the second one I came up with is, let's say you have a spring crop like peas. Somebody has a lot of peas planted out there. So thistles are definitely going to grow in that crop if you have peas. If you have something like lettuce and you can use a black plastic on that, then the thistles aren't going to grow in that black plastic area. Then you just have to worry between the rows. But let's say that you have peas as an early crop. You could go ahead and this isn't that appealing of an option, but you could let the thistles grow in that field until they're large using some hand pulling. But then once you've harvested your peas, you can go through there and mow once they're all pretty large. And that way you're knocking out a lot of the energy from those thistles. And then you might use solarization. You might use, let's say, a tillage treatment to make your seed bed flat again before you go in with your next crop or a cover crop the rest of the season. So the third one that I came up with, this is something where you could have a crop in there the whole season, which again is very challenging with thistles if you really want to control them. If you've got black plastic on your rows, you're not really having to worry about weed control in those rows. And then between the rows, you could try one of those summer cover crops. Like you could try a buckwheat cover crop, or you could try a short let's say oats or rye, because if you plant those during the summer, they're not going to get that tall. And you could try growing those between your rows so that you're smothering out any thistles between the rows, and that would still allow you to have a crop for the entire season. So I'm just trying to, think of examples about how you might combine these methods to create something that works for your farm. But I want to hear from you guys too. What are some other things that you found to be effective or not effective with thistles and quackgrass?
I have a plot about 1 acre, and so I want to plant the area to last for 4 years. And in the beginning, I only have a couple spots that quackgrass on it, and so I plant. I put on oats and peas and clover, red clover. I leave that for 4 years, and the first year they are really good, they're really tall, they were really tight. But second year they coming not much, and third year they kind of die out. And so these 4 years, I till it this year I try to do it all quackgrass, and so the plower he don't want to plow because it's gonna hurt his machine. And I have to find another person to do it, and he do it, but it's bumps him on top, and he use the disc, and it's not going down. And so I waste so much money to protect that land to be good soil, but I lost. And we don't know what to do with the quackgrass.
Okay.
I just want someone to plow it, and so I can do the tilling
Right.
until they
Yeah.
dry out. But
Yeah, would you be open to that? Just continually tilling throughout the season to
they're not
deplete them?
really deep enough to do
Yep. Yep. So you would need something like a plow to get 8 inches deep in the soil.
they don't want to do it.
Okay. Is this not here? It's at a different
No,
farm?
it's a different
Okay. And he doesn't want to do that because the rhizomes are getting stuck in his equipment?
really,
Oh,
really tight.
okay.
He plow some and pick it up. See bunch about this thing
Yep.
on the ground.
Yep.
And is that on a rototiller or on a conventional plow, like a plowshare?
It's, they use the disc.
A disc, and still it was coming in.
No, because they kind of often.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Okay.
We
Interesting.
don't know what to do with the quackgrass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you be open to trying a solarization?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. How can we do
How big is the area?
1 acre?
It's a whole acre? Yeah. So with a whole acre, I mean, the best thing to do for a whole acre is to continually till that until all the rhizomes are depleted and they can dry up, and especially tilling when it's wet. So if he's not willing to till, that's frustrating because then that leaves you with fewer options.
They say no, we don't do it.
Right. Yeah. You could try mowing a lot too. It's going to take a lot longer that way.
Yeah, if I
But-
do that, I would probably going to not tear it off. Just keep mowing
Sure.
until a couple years. But maybe I'm not trying to do it.
What if you tried planting? I know you tried the cover crop before,
I do.
but that was a pretty short cover crop. What if you tried something that was really, really vigorous, like a sorghum sitting grass? It's an annual, so you would have to plant it a couple of years in a row. But maybe you could try that for a year. It's definitely going to smother it that year, and then you could just see the year after, is the quackgrass coming back, or do you think that it's reduced?
Sure.
You could try that.
Establish that though, if there's a map.
Yeah, you would have to cultivate to get it in. Yeah. It'll compete, like the sorghum roots will compete with the crackgrass that's there, but you have to disturb the soil somehow to get it through.
Like
And it,
chisel plow.
yeah, exactly.
And this. And the plow again, and chisel plow, and this. That's what I think, but it
Yeah.
costs a lot.
even if they would be willing to just use a shallow cultivator so that you could at least plant that seed,
I don't know.
that would be helpful.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. Maybe
Yeah.
I will see. Yeah.
Okay.
What kind of effect does just like cultivating with like, so we have a lot of like black plastic in the field, and then we're able to mostly cultivate the aisles between. Like,
Yeah.
Does just like cultivating without like chopping up have a good effect?
No, not really.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless you've had a good effect with
I
it.
haven't.
Okay.
I don't know, it's just
Because
trying it.
yeah, if it's really shallow, like less than 3 inches, it's just gonna kind of chop up those roots a little bit, but not enough to actually dry out the rhizomes, because a lot of them are still protected underneath at that point.
What if you just keep doing it and doing it?
Just keep doing it constantly, then it'd probably have about the same effect as mowing constantly. So eventually it would work, especially if you're just doing it in those rows. Like, I'm imagining you have a whole row that's just thistles or just quackgrass. In that case, it's totally fine to just agitate it over and over again. But if this is just a small amount in one place in your row, then if you're doing that, you're gonna end up spreading it. Yeah, but if you have a really severe case, then yeah, you can do that and it'll be about the same as mowing.
What if you smother the rows with straw?
Yeah, so for quackgrass, I think that's more effective than with thistles. With thistles, you have to have like 5 inches of really thick straw in order for it to really affect them, in my experience.
I just put straw down. We can go. We're gonna
Yeah.
go walk out and look at where I did that, and there's totally thistles coming straight through.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
But quackgrass, it might be a
Only
little
one
bit
bed.
better.
yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
And then hand pulling if they're pulling.
Yeah, hand pulling is really hard through straw.
Is it?
Yeah,
To get
because
down.
then you can't really use the shovel technique as well, because it's harder to get the shovel through thick straw. So that makes it a little more challenging, or at least less appealing to do.
How about canary grass? I had
I-
to clear some of that, and it
Yeah.
seems to me it has, of course, nettles are similar too.
Right.
It has that mass of roots. You cannot hardly even get a shovel in. I sharpened a shovel
Yep, I experienced that too.
to do that,
Yeah.
but
I don't deal nearly as much with reed canary grass.
okay.
Put
be
it in the
honest.
same lines as quackgrass. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
rhizomes quite like that horizontal, but the thick sash is like.
Yeah.
Since I haven't worked with that weed as much, do you have tactics that have worked very well for you? Okay.
Other than brute force digging. However, with the canary grass, that severe digging where you just and then pick up little clods and beat them on your shovel, get all pissed off.
Yeah.
It's
I
very-
forgot about those steps. Those are
Yeah, it's
important.
very good for exercising your cursing
Yeah.
gene, but that worked on the
Okay.
canary grass.
Okay.
Of course, it works less well on the quackgrass, but in a confined area like a garden, that wiped the canary grass very
Okay.
quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, and it does it with quackgrass too. You just have to remain alert
Yeah.
and be willing to curse.
Right.
I think it does help.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're really hard to pull too.
Yeah.
Our orchard is some rocky ground. It gets in between those rocks and they're hard. You break your knees practically.
Yeah. It's very strong stuff. We should be making rope out of it or something.
We should be.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I hope this is helpful just to give folks an idea of what the different techniques are, why some of them might work better than others, and think about how on your own farm you might be able to combine these. Again, tilling, it's kind of a whole season commitment if you want to use that, because you have to go in and till multiple times. I really think, the smother crop or the cover crop idea, I think that has a lot of potential. I don't think a lot of people are using cover crops specifically for weeds, but if you can fit that into your management plan, especially in between rows that have plastic on them, I think that can really help quite a lot, because it's just smothering those weeds out.
What kind
So-
of cover crop would you recommend that actually can stand some traffic?
Oh.
Growing, you have to be able to walk in there all the time.
Yeah. If you wanted to try a perennial, I don't know if that works in your. I'm thinking a lot of the perennials are the best with traffic. Ryegrass is really good with traffic, like winter rye, millet. But if you're thinking about a perennial, if you do like a white clover and bluegrass mix or a white clover and fescue mix, I know that a lot of asparagus farms are using that, and they have really good luck with that. So you could try it if a perennial center works okay in the systems that you have. Yeah. No, but that's why you would want to add a grass to it. So if you're doing that, like a grass clover mix, the grass is really what's providing the weed control, and the clover's there just to, have all the other benefits of fixing nitrogen and organic matter. Yeah. I always like to recommend adding a clover for that. Anything else?
Do you think maybe like as we're walking around, you could like point out thistles that are at like different stages, and like also like, I don't know, just be like, this is what I would do in this situation. Would that be helpful for people?
Yeah, you can do that.
Sure. Cool. Okay. So Molly is actually up next. Do you have any other last comments or?
Let's see. I think that's all that I've got.
Cool.
Yeah.
So once she's done talking to Natalie, we can all stand up anyway, and we're gonna walk through that gate where the tractor just went, and then Molly is gonna present for a little while on some things in the field. Cool.
Thank you. I really like the Nix.
And what I noticed is now this year there's like a beautiful patch of clover.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe it just took a while. And so I'm actually doing it on purpose again in another spot. And my hope is that if I just like mow the ryegrass, the clover will kind of come up underneath it, and we can look at that too. But there's some grass coming up through here, but there aren't any thistles. But I don't remember if that's because there were never any thistles in this spot.
So that's a perennial clover?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, perennial clovers
It's a
just
Dutch white clover.
they just take a long time to establish. So I wouldn't really expect any good effect of them the first year.
Right. I didn't know what to expect. So I expected great things, and I was sorely disappointed. But now my patience, or my impatience, has been rewarded.
Yeah.
So
I noticed a couple other things too with the straw, and I don't know if you can comment anymore either, but I felt like some of the straw got a little bit too close to my onions, and then the onions were like looking like they weren't growing as well, especially more down on that end. I was trying to clear it away a little bit, and there's also some plants. I had some cucurbits down at the end that also I felt like were like looking kind of sickly, so I was trying to clear away the mulch from the plants because I think I got it a little bit too close. So I guess I would just be careful with that. And then the other thing I wanted to just say is that there were thistles coming up in that end. So if we want to look at thistles growing through straw, we can look at them. But
our heart's delight. Let's do it. Coming up through straw. So thicker next time.
Yeah.
This is looks like nice clean straw too. Sometimes you wind up with a lot of oat or
yeah,
or weed stuff in straw, and this is quite clean.
Yeah, this is stuff that like I don't know where it came from, but a community group donated it to us like 3 years ago, and it's been hanging out in the barn since then.
Yeah. And for the time factor, you were talking about 2 hours. Someone was talking about putting this down. I think that was efficient work. This would be much more difficult than that.
I had to leave for vacation the next day. So
It was so sad. It was so
But
late. I saw you doing it.
but it took us still a long time. I mean, I guess just depending on scale, this would be a very, very difficult thing to do on a big scale. But yeah.
Let's go down this way. We're gonna walk down to. We have some asparagus down here and oil. So we're starting to do a fair amount of cultivating. You can see that your asparagus has grown. This is asparagus that we planted on a date in May that I don't remember.
Right?
And now all of they're in the bottom of the trenches, and so now there's little weeds growing on the sides, so that I'm gonna come through and use the tractor to flip the soil into it, which should kill all of those little weeds that are there, which means that we don't have to weed it. It'll be awesome. Annie, how much would you fill in now? Would you fill in them in the rest of the way, or would you go like halfway?
growing on the other side of the trench.
Yeah, so if weed management is part of your goal, then yeah, go ahead and just do half of the pile on each side.
Okay.
Which is going to be hard to do.
Yeah.
Because that's like an inch on each side.
Yeah.
It's not going to be that much. But enough to kill a bunch of those weeds.
And would you think it would be okay to bury the drip tape?
With just an inch, it's fine.
What about when
you're
you
going to
fill it?
want to like get that out of there at some point for sure. Because the point is that you want to completely fill that trench, and then that's permanent.
Yeah.
So at some point, you need to get that drip tape out of there. It probably wouldn't take you too long to just, if you had another person, just lift it out before you even go in.
Okay, so that's one thing. And then if we're going to walk down a little bit farther, you can see an example of the annual ryegrass and then the white clover cover crop mix. Can you help us determine which ones are the annual ryegrass and which ones are
Oh god.
not this? Yeah. There's a lot of clover in here though.
Well, this is like,
No.
I'm having a really hard time distinguishing.
Do you think any of this is the annual ryegrass? So what happened here is that I prepared the soil and I tilled it, and then my coworker came through with the hand seeder, the belly grinder, as a former presenter called it, and she spread Dutch white clover mixed with annual ryegrass, and then miraculously it rained. So we have that in between the beds of the rhubarb, and the rhubarb is spaced so far out because eventually with rhubarb plants you split them so you get more of them. So then the plan is that these aisles will establish as perennial ground cover, and then when we're ready to split the rhubarb, we can just split it into the aisle here. That's
Why'd
the
you
thought.
decide to do annual ryegrass?
Because that's what my friend Mike does.
Okay. Does he have
And I
good
asked
success with
him. Yes.
that? Okay, good.
Yes.
So much.
So you can see the little bitty baby clovers are in here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them. I went a little wild on the seeding rate on account of my frustration from the last year's experience.
Right. So this is just this year.
This is just this year. So there's a lot of clover. So
Hopefully.
Annie, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my thought on this is once it gets like taller and fuller, I'm just gonna mow it
Right, exactly.
and keep it mowed at like a grass level.
Yeah, and it might not get to that level this year,
Okay.
but
But if other things get big and out of
then you
control,
should
then
go
I'm gonna
ahead and
mow.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay.
Next year gonna be a lot.
You're gonna split the
Yeah.
rhubarb next
Nice
year?
and thick.
No, in like 3 or 4 years probably.
But I think you need to pinch your rhubarb
I think you're right.
because they took over.
It's a decorative twig.
Oh,
So like a branch. That. So the weed management in the aisles is the same plant. Because this is going to be here for a long time, instead of using the black plastic mulch like we use on most parts of the farm, I used landscape fabric, which is like a woven plastic material, so water can still get through it, but it is like much more durable. This has a life of like 15 years or something. So then with the black plastic mulch where you take it out and put it back every year, this one will just stay. And the pro of it is its longevity, and the con of it, I'd say, is that it's a lot more expensive, and also I had to do it by hand, and so that took more time.
So does it break down ultraviolet through the sun over 15 years, or do you need to come in here and pull it out
I think
yourself?
I've never seen 15-year-old landscape fabric, but I would imagine you have to come and pull it out. Actually, maybe the stuff at the bottom of our greenhouse is 15 years old. It's probably close. I don't think it will break down.
That is what they do in organic orchards, is they pull it out after a while.
And then do they replace it, or do they just pull it out because things are established?
They replace it.
Some they replace it. Okay.
In orchards, you have to cut an L through it in order to insert it around the plant that is already there.
That makes sense.
That's how they do that.
Okay. The other thing that I was going to talk about just very briefly is that one thing that's just in terms of like farm weed management, a thing that's really irritating, I find, is how the ends of every bed just like accumulate a ton of big weeds, and they're hard to manage. And so what I did is I actually like went, the edge of the field is like right here, and so I can come in eventually. I can come in and cultivate going this direction in addition to going that direction, so that then you can get a clean field edge. And I was able to do that because I have enough space to do that, but I value not weeding like the ends of beds, and I value not having them be like really tall. And so I decided it was important to me to leave space on either end, and like when I lay plastic, I leave space so that I can work going the crosswise direction as well.
What are you growing the willow for?
Well, we're looking to branch into the decorative market because it's not annual vegetables.
Waku, do you want to share anything about your experience using ground fabric?
Yeah, you use
I
it a lot.
think it works, but it's a lot of work to lay it down, burn the hole. It's just a lot of work. I would rather go with plastic mulch. It's easier.
Okay.
It's more efficient in terms of using time. So, and cost probably is more effective. Effective. And time management, I think that's more efficient. But last year I did that one. It took a lot of my time to lay it down and also put the stapler to hold that into the ground and burn the hole.
Yeah.
It took a lot of time. But this year we do plastic mulch, and my next son's more happy with that. It's easy to plant it using the transplanter is more efficient. But the other one we punch hole like this, we burn and we lay it, and later on we have to dip into it. It's a lot of work, and they would rather have me to just do with the plastic mulch more efficient.
Tractor implement that will lay it down?
But with the plastic, the landscape fabric, you have to burn your own hole. But for the plastic mulch, you use tractor to lay, and it's more efficient.
Yeah.
And when you plant, you just use transplanter, just punch to get through the plastic mulch, and you can plant faster. Even half acre, we do only 2 hours, and we can fill all of that. So.
The equipment also, like, if you have the equipment, you have to make sure you're getting the thing that will work for the equipment. So like, and that the equipment will work for the size stuff you have. So it was like I could have adjusted our plastic mulch layer to be the right size width for the landscape fabric, but I decided it would take less time to just do the 2 beds of landscape fabric than it would to adjust the equipment. But like, if Waku was doing a half an acre like of that, then the calculation would be different.
That's right.
Another technique that I used last year that I kind of liked is for folks who have the plastic mulch in their field, you know how it makes a raised bed. So it makes a raised bed and then it's covered with plastic mulch. And what I've done is I've made the beds with the plastic mulch layer, but without drip tape or without plastic mulch. I've just used it to make a raised bed. And then you end up with this like really kind of ugly crunchy top looking bed, and you let it sit for a couple weeks. And so I did this last year for the dill, so I wanted to plant the dill at the end of May. So in the middle of May, I made like 8 beds, and I just let them sit there. And then some weeds germinated, and then right before I planted, I went through with the tiller and just tilled like an inch or so, or less than an inch. So what I did, this is called stale seed bedding, and so what I did was like, it turned it into a much nicer planting surface, but I also killed that first set of weeds that had come up. so that you're dealing with fewer weed seeds than you would be if I had just like made the bed and planted right into it. And so that there were still a lot of weeds because it's this farm, but it seemed to be a little bit better doing that. Let's go. We're gonna walk over not this field but the next one, and we're gonna look at Kristen, who's a first-year farmer and is using some other weed control techniques, and then we're gonna look at the garlic that folks planted in the fall, because there's some straw mulch there, and we can look at how that's done. And then there's also plastic mulch, and there's no mulch, so you can see the varying degrees of mulching.
That would be great to see whatever garlic you're willing to show us. Yeah.
All of the garlic. Okay, great. We're on our farm, because we're certified organic, you can use cardboard, but it can't have like tape in it, and you also can't use cardboard that has colored ink on it. So it has to be all black and white ink. So she has laid out cardboard in this aisle, and as you can see, the places where there are cardboard look much better than the places where there are not cardboard. But it's a lot of cardboard. It seems really cool. The complication is that the cardboard flows away, which is kind of annoying, and then also when it's like a partial cardboard row, then it's like hard to cultivate the other half of the cardboard row. So that's been a challenge. But I thought that was really interesting and would be a great solution on a smaller scale too. Or if you had it. She works at a co-op, and so she has access to a lot of cardboard boxes. Most of us might not have this many cardboard boxes coming into our lives, but she does, so it was like really easy for her to bring them. And then these are the garlic plots.
I think this mulch is very helpful too, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, the straw mulch.
Yeah, so there's a couple beds that are straw mulch in garlic, and then some that are in plastic mulch, and some that are not mulched. And so you can kind of see there's obviously like also different farmers do different things and plant different ways. So you can see a fair number of differences in the garlic. I think that I'm pretty happy with how the straw mulch did on the garlic here. This was 30 bales of straw for 3 beds, and it was $120. And it took maybe like 4 hours to do.
So you added it. So I'm seeing some of the whole rows are covered. So you let the garlic grow and then you put it in around it.
No, sorry, I should clarify. So what I did is we planted it in October, and then I let the ground freeze, and then like probably like early December, I mulched on top just for it, like in the rows where the garlic is planted, and it was a thick layer. It was like that thick. And then in the spring, when they started to come up, then May moved the straw out to allow the garlic to kind of come through, because I noticed that only some of it was coming through and some of it was like really struggling.
That's smart.
So now the straw's in the aisles, and then I was considering the option of moving the straw back into the middle for more weed control, and then cultivating the aisles with the tractor.
The black plastic or the stuff with the straw was taller and healthier. But both of them look a lot better than where you didn't use any at all.
Yeah.
When you're looking at it, what would you just by height?
Got it.
Yeah.
Has anybody used a flame weeder before? No. Okay. What have you used it for?
Burning weeds.
Yeah?
Around
Okay.
tree stumps and stuff.
Okay,
Yeah, around
cool.
trees.
Nice. So, flame
Just
weeders.
starting fires in general.
Okay. So starting fires is one thing that you can use flame weeders for, but usually when we're using them for weed management in vegetable crops, we're actually not trying to use the flame part of it to kill weeds, even though that's really fun. We're actually trying to kill them using the heat, so it's called like thermal weeding. This is most appropriate on really small weeds because they're the ones that are going to respond best to heat and a flame being put on them. Trying to control large weeds, they're going to kind of laugh at the heat a little bit and they'll still be able to survive. Also, trying to use them on large weeds might mean that we start a fire that spreads. So small weeds, when they're in, that 1 inch tall stage, that's when a flame weeder is really, really good. And you can use them on perennials, but just keep in mind, again, like we talked about earlier, you're pushing them back a little bit by killing some of the foliage, but they're still going to be underground, they're still going to be surviving. Do you want to demonstrate how it works?
I will. Will you turn the gas on, please? I forgot to turn it on. So this is just like the same thing you'd use for your barbecue grill.
Okay, gas is
So
on.
the gas is on now?
Yep.
And then this will be a little tricky to light.
Where do you want to demonstrate it?
I was just gonna do it. I was just gonna point it at the door, I think.
Or my face.
Yeah, or Annie's
Over
face.
here.
So you want to do this safely. I highly recommend using like I don't know what these things are called. I call it a striker. Oh, cool.
Bunsen burner, right?
That's the thing you light it with.
Right.
Yeah. So I like to use this rather than a match because your precious hand gets to stay farther away.
Yeah.
So every one will be different, but this one has like the on-off valve on the top, and then it also has a control on the hand. So when I like that, you can hear the gas coming out. And if you're doing this with a lighter, I like to get the flame going first and then do the gas. But with the striker, that's not possible. So you want to make sure you point it away from everything that you love. And then it would be easier if I had longer body parts, but I don't. So then I just started a little bit. And then you got a flame going. And then you can so some safety things after I lit it is that you have a flame, and so it's very flammable. And it also heats up where you are. And so I one time burned a pair of shoes because I wasn't holding the end of this far enough away. I was flame weeding too close to my shoes and the soles melted off. So you want to have your arm far away. And if you're flame weeding small things, you don't have to burn them to bits. It just takes a quick pass in order to do it. Because correct me if I'm wrong, what you're actually doing is exploding the cells of the plant. So the heat causes the water that's in the cells to boil, which causes them to expand, which then explodes the cells so they die. We have a little bit of a dandelion issue right here.
Not anymore.
Bye-bye. So you don't have to linger. You can do a pass, and I like to go back and forth as I walk and do my passes that way. What else?
That was great because I didn't know that. I thought you had basically annihilate the entire flame.
Yeah,
So
the
there's
same
black
day.
dirt there.
Yeah, the same day I melted the shoes, I burned up like a 20-pound tank of propane in an area the size of these 4 picnic tables because I didn't understand how to use it, and so I was just killing quackgrass doing that, and it number 1 didn't really work, and number 2 was a huge waste of propane and shoes.
Yeah. Just go briefly, no?
Yeah, just go briefly.
Not see until they die or
Yeah.
burn.
Yeah, you don't have to watch them die. Yeah.
What is kind of fun is that
You don't have
can,
to. Usually they won't die right away.
Yeah, you can come back in a couple hours and they'll be.
Yeah. But it is really fun to watch them die at the same time. But that's not really how it's supposed to work.
Okay.
So again, if you do it on really small weeds, it's going to be a lot more effective than if you do it on really big weeds. What I had thought about bringing today was a walk-behind flame weeder. You use it like a rototiller, and it has 5 torches in the front in a row. So it's about the size where if you wanted to walk between your rows of vegetables, you can. And we were using it last summer at one of the research stations to flame weed before we planted peppers. So we did a still seed bed, like what Molly was talking about earlier, where you agitate the soil to get the weeds to germinate in the spring so that you can kill all those weeds before you plant. And the way we were killing the weeds before we plant was by using a flame weeder, because this is a way you can weed without having to till your soil or cultivate. And it's nice to not have to disturb the soil, because every time you disturb the soil, more weed seeds come up. Then you use that no more weed seeds are coming up. So that's why we wanted to use that. I was gonna bring it today, but it was an hour-and-a-half drive down to get it, and then had to return it tomorrow. So we decided to use this one instead. But it's the same concept. And another thing to talk about, I guess, is how far to keep it from the soil.
Oh, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be like 5 inches at least from the soil. And I think that's about what you were doing because the flame was so big anyway. Yeah, so you kind of have to.
Another just like safety thing is the burner on that, and frankly, like the bottom 8 inches of the arm get pretty hot, and so don't like touch it.
Is that what you use to poke the holes in the?
Yes, it's what we use to poke the holes. It's what we use sometimes when the barn doors get frozen shut in the winter. We melt the ice with them.
But don't burn the barn.
Yeah, I started the barn door on fire that way too. But yeah, it does really good for poking holes. Waku, what did you use for poking holes when you did your laser cover?
I have a steel 2 inches steel and wire into a stick, and I use this burner to make that very hard and just punch like this.
Okay.
It's easier because this one you will burn your forehead, right? But in that way you only, because the punch hole is very hard, and you can punch about 6-7 holes that you have to make it hard again and burn again. So that's what I did last year. So I have 2 interchange.
Okay.
When I use the other and my kids burn the other one and it get hard, then I switch it and doing that.
Okay.
So, but it's a nice car. If you use that, it's very effective.
If you have any straw or just like dead weeds or dead plants on your soil, be really, really careful when using it there, and it may not be the most appropriate tool to use if you have a lot of organic matter on your soil, because it'll light that on fire and that can spread.
Or in a drought.
Yeah.
Also the hoop house.
I think they have one I saw on at a neighbor Sing farm. They use a small one. It have cover and just go walk like this in your pathway. I think that's very cool too. It creates us this large and with the frame inside and just a wall. It touch the ground, so that might be good for your owl. So
Yeah.
copy that. Yeah, it creates us like a shower, but it's open and the frame is in the middle. And when you pat the bed and before sit your bed, direct sitting and just go one pass and go another pass. And it's really, yeah.
That's interesting.
I was taught to use it in the greenhouse, which is not a good idea, but like when we were, or in the hoop house, we were seeding carrots and beets. And so we seeded them, and then when, like after like a week or something, all the weeds started to germinate, but the carrots still had not germinated, and then we flamed all the little baby weeds. I don't know if that's normal.
Yeah, that's a great thing to do with it. Totally.
It worked for
not in a hoop house.
Not in
your
the-
life is too precious.
Yeah, it's not inside.
That's what pretty strong did in Canada, because he say about you put your carrot seed and the 5th day you do frame weeding, and later on then the 6th and 7th day then the carrot germinate and there's no weed. So
Yeah. Worked good. Well,
Anyone have other weed questions?
yeah, we're pretty early.
Or do you
but-
have other equipment that's cool that people might want to see?
I think Laura, you sent out the information about the BCS. What was about BCS?
I did. I had actually received from Annie an email about where to find the walk behind BCS tractors.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I can imagine that I sent that to you.
That's all I emailed was like
okay.
sources on like where to find them. Yeah. Where to buy them. Yeah. I mean, I think for farmers here, I think we've already kind of demoed most of the tools. If there are people that are visiting, if you're interested in seeing what we have wheel hose and hoe hose, just different types of hand tools. If you're interested, we can
like the one,
walk over there.
the triangle.
So now it's this big.
But I like it.
I'm sorry that it's really heavy, but it makes straight lines in your bed, and then it also has so it makes 3 lines going down your bed, and then it makes a grid every foot, so that then you have like a grid in your field where you know that you have like So if you're gonna plant everything 1 foot apart, then you just like go at all the corners. Or if you're gonna go every 6 inches, then you go in between. Or if you want 2 beds, you can go in the middle of here. The idea is that the straighter we can get our lines and the better our spacing, the more we can use tractors to do the weeding. And we can't use tractors if the lines are all wavy and not together.
Or you use a horse and just go straight like this.
This one go by hand or pull up behind?
It can both go by hand and
Just
be
do
pulled
like
behind the
this. Once you
tractor.
plant the bed, you just go like this.
But if you want me to pull it by the tractor, you have to move it to your field. I don't want to do it.
You got a welder to do this?
Yeah.
It's cool.
It's pretty heavy duty. It was $350 and $250 of it was for the bending of this rebar into a circle.
How'd you get it bent?
So he had to contract it out to get someone to do this. But then he like made everything else.
I will use it when I print my next letters
Do it.
and patois. Biết tao nó xì của xíu nó cả hiện ra là con thua thế nhưng mình thua. Con thua có muốn ra học giá cái tỏ lò hết thì để tại cái.
So I was blabbering and I did not hear what this was for. I'm
Or just a
sorry.
grip, create straight line, and when you plant, you just plant according to each grip.
Grid.
So, yeah.
Okay,
So it's a
great.
foot, a foot, a foot, a foot.
Yes. Oh, ingenious.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a total copy from the tool that Waku sent me from the
It's easy when you cultivate. When you cultivate in this path, it's more efficient, more faster. Yeah, but if you plant different and not in a row, it's difficult.
Have you all used wheel hose before?
No.
I think wheel hoe is the most popular tool on our farm.
I have a friend who has a tattoo of a wheel hoe right here.
Okay,
And I think
this
it's
one,
important.
this one, every time I train the farmer, I remind them all the time until they really tired to hear what I'm saying because you can see this wheel hoe with the difference.
Yeah.
Because the farmer put on the edge of the field and they run over. That's why we're gonna get the wheel hoe. But we're gonna take it. It's $400. And yeah, this one go like this. On the field. And this is the I can adjust it. It's broken, and so just one height side. But the other one we have it. This is the adjust to low, short people like me. We need to go lower, and tall you need to go higher. So like I will see which one we have that one. One have a handle to take it out and adjust, but this one you just go by the nuts here. But you need to have some wrench or something to open this one and push the one, and you need lower and then push something down. You need higher, then you just push up. Same thing as that one. This is really help. But I like the that blue one better because the open arm is fit me. I have short
This
arm.
one cultivate my aisle.
But this one for the tall and the tall people.
And do you sharpen your little blade down there at all, or
No.
even partially? Okay,
Just push.
just push it through.
Yeah,
Okay,
push it through. And they might well out. You can see this one. They already smaller, and that one is really. They're not big enough. They kind of a little bit short because you
Gradually
use a
wear away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
This is for farmers here. Is if you're using something and it breaks, don't put it back because then it won't ever get fixed. So if something breaks, you can put it in the shop and also tell me, and we can try to fix it. And it's
Easy thing that I put my hole in there and put into here. I
Yeah.
push this one to my field, and you have something you can put on here and you push to the field. Yeah, it's hard.
Do you ever use any other attachment? Like there's like a claw.
Yeah,
You use it.
the blue one we have that.
So you can change out the stirrup on the bottom for like
Yeah,
a
we can
claw.
change. I can show the claw.
But yeah.
Not that one. Oh, I like this one. And you like that one.
one when you go under your lettuce, and you go this way, go this way, and go anyway. So
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Cái nhà tôi có lo.
Oh, that's
Một bé
quick.
thủ liệu của tôi chỉ
Yeah.
xí rồi.
Oh.
Is that your favorite one?
Yeah, this is my favorite one.
See where you could move up and down a row
Yep.
fairly quickly with
Yeah,
this.
underneath your lettuce leaves, and you can go this way, or you just chop like this,
Yeah.
and when you pull back, just a little bit like this. It curls either way. So
Okay. Very nice.
yeah.
Do you want to talk about that, Stirrupo,
Yeah,
really quick?
this one we can. I like to weed like this because but on the field it's more smooth because the soil is it's plowed already, and this one is hard, but it's really good to do it. Just standing in your backer, you do like this and keep eating. Yeah. Or if you don't want to do that, you can just go like this. Coming out really well too. Yeah.
Okay.
But my husband.
Oh,
Yeah.
very good.
First
Yeah.
time you did it, and second time you disturb the plant, and so they die because you're just pushing, and they just sitting there, and if raining, they come out again. Yeah, just go like this.